All right, thank you, everybody. Those of you who are remaining. I'd like to introduce somebody whose name I think most of you already know. It's Penny Pritzker. She has the kind of background that make us all feel really bad about ourselves. So, born into a prominent family, of course, BA in economics at Harvard, JD MBA at Stanford. She, by the way, served on the boards of both of those institutions later on. Founded several companies, including Vi Senior Living, The Parking Spot, Artemis Real Estate. She served on the boards of Hyatt, TransUnion, LaSalle Bank, and now on Microsoft. And of course, not to mention that she was Commerce Secretary in the Obama administration. And a little known fact, she actually has a gold medal in the decathlon from the Los Angeles Olympics.
No.
That part was fake news. And now is a philanthropist, a civic leader, an investor, an industrialist. But what I'd like to ask first, because I think the piece of Penny's life that we know littlest about is the piece post-Commerce Secretary. So what are you doing now? What's occupying your time? You don't seem like somebody who wastes a lot of time, so what's on your agenda now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And for those of you who were here for the previous panel and who love this conference, I just have to say Deborah Quazzo is one of my heroes, so I just want to give a major shout out for her and a round of applause. So, you know, the weird thing is when you get, when you're finished serving in government, at least when I served in government, you resigned from everything you did and were unaffiliated with anything. And so when you finish, you have this white sheet of paper in front of you, and at my age, that's a little terrifying. So I've been working on putting together my next career. And part of it is building upon my experience. As you said, I basically spent most of my career in business, so 30 plus years as a business builder, which is the thing I love to do. And that's what we're doing now at PSP Partners. And in fact, we've been investing. One of the things that I had the privilege of doing in commerce was working on our digital policy for the country. And I loved working with technology leaders. And the other thing that I made as a priority was how do we address the skilled workforce that we need in this country? And education and skilled workforce have been a passion. So I've been trying to combine those in some of the areas that we've been investing, which is why we're here, you know, talking with folks. But some of the kinds of businesses that we've been investing in have been facilitating bringing greater efficiency or connectivity to various areas. So for example, like a company like Piazza, which is a platform for STEM students and professors to engage, that's now being used by major corporations to source talent. Or House Canary, which is a real estate valuation business. Or Beachfront, which is a mobile video platform, advertising platform. Or Elvest, that's an online savings and investment platform for women. Or Measure, which is a drone as a service business. So we've got an eclectic set of companies that we're invested in that we're helping to nurture and grow. The common theme is that's what we like to do, is work with business leaders and entrepreneurs.
Excellent. Well, you know, in my time at KKR, when you were Commerce Secretary, there was a lot that cabinet position accomplished. And it's a eclectic position. As most of you know, there are, I think, 46,000 people in the Commerce Department, and it has a brief that is really eclectic itself. Can you tell us a few of the things you're proudest of in terms of what you accomplished during the time as Commerce Secretary?
So imagine the following scenario. You walk into a new job. You've never served in government. This is my situation. And the department that you're running, think of it like a large corporation with 12 divisions. You do everything from give out patents and trademarks to set standards for everything from nanotechnology to fire hydrants. And in between are things like international trade or the weather service or the census, et cetera. So how do you make sense of all that, and how do you try and move the needle forward? But most importantly, how do you service your number one stakeholder, which is the business community? And that was probably one of the biggest things I was most proud of, was we worked together over the first 100 days to set a strategic plan, which we called our Open for Business agenda. And the idea was that we would focus on trade and investment, innovation, making more of our data available, environmental intelligence, and then we try and operate the place better. And operating the place better might have, was not an insignificant objective of ours. The things I'm most proud of are, first of all, we tried to focus on real solutions that were important to the business community, because that's what the president said to me. He said, I want you to build a bridge with the business community. His relationship at that time I came in was not very good. He said, I want you to make sure the voice of business is heard when we make policy, and I want you to be the chief commercial advocate. So, for example, as I said, we put together the first digital policy for the United States, arguing globally for a free and open internet, which is not an insignificant thing, something I think we take for granted to a certain extent, but we're seeing more and more the challenges there, addressing issues like privacy and cybersecurity. We unlocked our data. The Department of Commerce produces 20 to 40 terabytes of data a day, and we've made 30 plus partnerships with private companies to help our data be more utilized. So census data, weather data, data about our economy. We produce GDP statistics, so all the data that goes behind that. Advanced manufacturing was another major area. We created 14 public-private partnerships around the country to take innovative technologies from lab to market. So, a lot of things that I was very proud of, the most important of which was trying to give the organization purpose and a clarity of what success looked like.
Terrific. Well, one of the things you mentioned was cybersecurity. I think we're all reading in the news about how critical that is, and how that's becoming more and more a part of our lives that we need to pay attention to. So, and I know you did a framework for the protection of our critical infrastructure, and that was the first time that had been done. Can you tell us something about, in your experience in that arena, what's going on now, what we can look forward to, and maybe what we ought to be thinking about as we're reading the news? Yeah,
so, so the framework, the cybersecurity framework was a language, in essence. This is the way I think about it. I'm sure the technologists would make it more complicated and thorough. But basically, it's a common language we can all use to understand where a business or where an organization is in terms of its cybersecurity protections, and a framework within which to judge where vulnerabilities are and where actions need to be taken. That's an important role the government can play, which is to, first of all, get us all talking the same language, if you think about it, and using the same criteria to judge. We can set our own metrics, but at least so that we're having good communication. Today in cybersecurity, the second thing that we did was the last 6 months of the administration, President Obama created a cybersecurity commission to really lay a blueprint for the next administration. And I'm told the Trump administration has taken this up seriously to address issues of cybersecurity. And what I learned, the biggest takeaway for me, and there's like 30 major recommendations in this report that are being acted on by the government and others. What you really take away from this is we are only as secure as our least secure partner. And our critical infrastructure in this country is run predominantly by the private sector. And as you learned, if you thought about it, it was through the HVAC contractor that the breach at Target occurred. Now that feels like that was ancient history, but I use that as an example to say, you as a business are only as secure as your least secure partner. Right. And sometimes you don't even know who those partners are. And so a lot of the challenge in cybersecurity, particularly as all of you are creating new businesses or growing businesses, is to be born secure. That was not something 5 years ago business builders thought about, but it's really an important layer that we need to bring into our businesses and our activities today.
Yeah, and it's interesting you layer privacy on top of that and what the European Union is doing now. I think this has become, effectively a critical area of investment for every company that has ambitions to serve across geography.
It's going to be really interesting, particularly in light of all the, circus that went on last week and others, is, as Europe rolls out GDPR, which is their privacy requirements for use of any individual data. I believe they're going to end up setting the standard for what happens globally because, frankly, our country has not even begun to address this issue, as we saw last week in Congress. And so I think what will happen is, it's kind of a first mover advantage in some respects. I think Europe will end up setting a standard because for any of you who are doing business in Europe, you have to comply, and the penalties are really punitive.
Right. So let's go on to education, jobs, and training. I know a week ago you wrote an op-ed in the USA Today, and you were commenting on some of the tariff policies, et cetera, but the point you were making is our central economic challenge is technology change, not trade. And you link that with jobs and skills. Can you tell us what you meant by that?
Yeah, so imagine how, I don't know, I was educated 30 plus years ago when I graduated from school, and the fundamental thesis back then was you go to school, you finish school, you do your career. That doesn't work anymore. We've got to change the modus operandi, and we've got to be lifelong learners. And we've got to also create a variety of pathways for individuals so that you can not only be a lifelong learner, but for those of us where going to college is an outcome, that's fine. We have plenty of data that shows that your income will be, that puts you on a better path to income. But we have greater than 50% of the United States population that's not graduating from college and won't graduate from college. And we're not servicing those folks to help them be able to achieve their ambitions and to have a pathway into economic prosperity. And yet there are plenty of jobs out there, and we need to, and this is an opportunity for all of you in this room, is to really is creating tools to address that. And Richard, you and I were talking about this, this lifelong learning culture, which is what we really need to achieve in our country, is a generational change. It acknowledges the fact that, a young person today will probably have 10 or 15 jobs in their life. And in order for them to be prepared as they move and transition from job to job, they've got to become lifelong learners. We've got to make it more transparent. What are the skills that you need as you move through your career, whether you're intentional about it or as you meet, forks in the road? We've got to harness greater data in order to create greater clarity about credentialing. We've got to have pathways that clarity about a pathway. If I, as a sixth grader today said, geez, I'd like to be involved in artificial intelligence or machine learning or cybersecurity, careers that frankly didn't exist when I was in sixth grade and didn't even exist when I got out of graduate school. Where's the advising on careers? Where's the tools that are available? Now, they're being created. That's what's so exciting, I think, about this conference, is it's bringing together people in many different areas of education and training. But I think one of the things, Richard, you were asking me earlier, what am I excited about being here? There are tools today that are coming out that really can address some of these big challenges that are facing our workforce.
Right. So you were a co-sponsor and co-author, perhaps, of this CFR report on the future of the U.S. workforce. And one of the things that report said is that we have to be cognizant that there is institutional failure here that is government, private sector, and educational institutions, are failing to equip our population with relevant skills for the balance of the 21st century. That report was quite comprehensive in creating a menu of options at all levels of how to address this. Maybe just for this audience, that I'm not sure everyone has looked at this, you can boil it down to some of the key findings and let us know what recommendations you guys had in that report.
Sure. So first of all, for those of you who aren't familiar, CFR is the Council on Foreign Relations, and you may ask yourself, why would the Council on Foreign Relations be interested in workforce training? Isn't that a domestic issue? But fundamentally, the leadership of the Council's view is our workforce, if we don't address this and better prepare our workforce to be competitive in the 21st century, it's a national security issue. That's kind of the big idea. The second big idea is we need a generational change in how we do education. I think that's why most of you are here. You believe that. And that generational change needs to embrace the fact that technology and globalization are not going away. Artificial intelligence, automation, globalization are here to stay. I think we all can agree on that. And that the approach needs to be, we have to have greater opportunities for lifelong learning. What does that mean and how is that presented is an opportunity, but it's a challenge for all of us. The second, as I said, is greater transparency about pathways, greater opportunity for experiential learning, internships and apprenticeships, more advising. There's college advising out there. There is not career advising. And there are tools being created to provide career advising. There's a tool called Journeys that's being created today that gives you a pathway if you're sitting in school or how you get from where you are in your education to where you'd like to be. A couple other points the report makes is that the current federal level of commitment to displaced workers, which is called trade adjustment assistance, is completely ineffectual and needs to be rethought. And the other federal issue is really modernizing benefits. How do we, acknowledging that 55 million Americans today work in the contract and gig economy, how do they earn the benefits that we who have full-time jobs are earning at our work? How do they get retirement benefits, workers' comp, health care, et cetera, et cetera? And so how do you earn that? Even let's say you have a portfolio of work, how can you put those pieces together? There's a bias in the report that is that solutions are predominantly local, meaning that the governor or mayor, along with business leaders, along with the educational institutions, starting K-12 all the way through community colleges and universities, and the NGO and social safety net organizations need to come together to address the challenge in their region. And finally, we call for a national commission because this is an effort and an initiative that needs kind of generational change. The same way at the beginning of the 20th century, when we went from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy, we said public high school needs to be ubiquitous for everyone. It's this similar type of major step function change in the way we think and deliver training and education needs to go on in the country. And those are some of the major findings or theses that are offered. The report is meant to be, as you said, a menu. So if there's some aspect of that that's of interest, you don't have to read the whole thing. You can go through and figure out, I fall in this category. Here are programs that are out there that are working that might be replicable.
Right, and one of the things that this report said is that about 2/3 of the 13 million new jobs that were created in the US since 2010 require some significant level of digital skills. And we have a number of people at this conference who are focused on the achievement gap about providing an effective education across all of our cohorts of socioeconomic stratification in this country. And many others are focused on the skills gap, which you've talked about already in terms of not having the right skills associated with the population coming up for the right jobs. My question is, how closely are these two things linked? Can we achieve any closure of the skills gap without first achieving, seeing a closure of the achievement gap? How do you think about equity in education as it relates to the upskilling of jobs?
Well, it's an and, not an or. Basically, we need to address achievement gap and skills gap. I think they're related to one another in that, employers, if you talk to employers, and I was having a conversation this morning with Richard Barth about, employers and the challenges that they're facing. Start with employers are part of the solution available to a skills gap or an achievement gap, but they can't do it themselves. They've got to, there's an educational component, and then there's an informational component that needs to exist that says, here's what one needs to know and be able to do. And there are both hard skills and soft skills. And in a funny way, one of the biggest challenges that employers face today are the soft skills. What are certain things that we all take for granted that employers struggle with, which is, will my employee show up on time? Do they understand the etiquette of a workplace? Have they had exposure to a workplace? It's why we call for internships. It's why we also need employers to understand sometimes transportation is one of the biggest impediments to being able to be employable. I can't get from here to there. You meet young people who say, I have to take 2 buses and a train to get someplace. And if somehow that transportation set of links breaks down or doesn't work, or you miss something, you're completely without a safety net. Sure. So, the challenge is multiple levels, and that's what makes it hard. We have to give people, we need technical skills that are in demand, but we also need to give young people job preparation. And I think that I've seen recent studies, 82% of Americans want to see job and career skills offered in school. And so we need a mindset among educators that this is not just about the pedagogy of learning history. My daughter's a history teacher, but it's also about learning the skills necessary to be part of the workforce. And we need to marry those more closely together. The other major acknowledgement that we need as a country is to acknowledge college is not the answer for everyone. We have less than 50% by far of Americans that are graduating from 4-year college. And we can't just say, okay, that's okay. We've got to be able to offer greater pathways, and there's many tools being created that say, how do you create either nano degrees, or how do you what credentials do I need in order to be employable? There are many families can't afford college at the moment of graduation from high school. And so this is the conundrum we face. And finally, I would say one of the bigger conundrums is counseling. We just don't have the kind of comprehensive career counseling available. And it's hard. How am I going to advise somebody how to become an artificial intelligence expert when I have no clue what that means? And I couldn't do that myself. So I need help if I'm an advisor, or counselor, or a teacher.
So and I fully agree with how you're positioning the issue, but in your time at Commerce, one of the things that you looked at pretty carefully is how jobs are going to change in the 21st century with AI, with robotics, with the dislocations from digitization, et cetera. These are going to change jobs pretty radically, and it has the danger of making both the skills gap a wider gap, because you'll have highly skilled jobs which will be highly in demand, but for a thinner and thinner layer of the population that's able to do those skills, unless we sort of rain down on, as you were suggesting, whether it's through apprenticeship programs or different perspectives on education as you go through high school and college. I'm just trying to figure out, is there some systems thinking that might address this as a society? In the same way you said, hey, universal high school at the end of the 20th century, or sorry, at the beginning of the 20th century, you know, we had the GI Bill, and sort of universal college was a thesis after World War II. What's our thesis now, and how can we galvanize not-for-profits and for-profits and institutions and government to get around a systems thinking solution?
I think the systems thinking starts with this notion of what I call lifelong learning. And that sounds very nebulous, but if you actually thought about public high school is a nebulous concept too. We've defined it as, you know, certain classes and a place and et cetera, but that's not how it began. And so to me, if lifelong learning is an essential element of the 21st century workforce, then, and clarity of pathways into careers, then what are the tools that we need to be offering, whether they're offered by our educational system, by our employers, you know, and where do you need the social safety net to be applied where someone is bridging from one place to another and needs perhaps some support while they're making that transition. I don't mean to make that sound nebulous, but if you look at some of the most exciting tools that are being created, you know, whether it's, you know, Axonify to Udacity to, you know, on and on. You could name company after company, you know, Class Dojo, that you guys are all here. You're creating solutions. And I think the moniker is we're a country of lifelong learning. And we need to make that affordable for people. And where's the federal government? How do we make a Pell Grant or a MAP grant more flexible so it can apply to nano degrees or it could apply to various skills learning? How do we, as a society, acknowledge that, you know, where I am when I'm 18 years old is not where I necessarily am going to be when I'm 40 or 50, and that the definition, I'm not defined, you know, I appreciate your saying, well, she went to Harvard and she went to Stanford and all of that, but today that's really, how relevant are my degrees 30 plus years later to what's going on today?
Yeah, totally fair. So in terms of better matching educational offerings and 21st century employment realities, we have, you know, a lot of these solution sets that you've mentioned, but one that we haven't really gotten into is to what extent are we looking at, I mean, our government and institutions we have relied on to provide our education largely through this whole period. It has been, I would say, an institution-led, mostly public institution-led educational society that we've been a part of and we've benefited from. Are we entering an era where it's a little bit more, if I can say, consumer-led or private industry-led, where people will be figuring out, okay, here's what I need to do to effectively participate in a 21st century economy, and here are the tools available to me at these costs, and you know, rather than relying on our public and you know, our public educational institutions to sort of set that out for us. To what extent do you think we're at a sea change there?
I think we are at a sea change, and I think there are multiple forces at work. First of all, the consumer. I mean, I saw this firsthand as Secretary of Commerce. We created this thing called Manufacturing Day. We were promoting advanced manufacturing. We got thousands of manufacturers to open up their doors to middle school kids to see what advanced manufacturing looked like, because frankly, it's not your father's, you know, manufacturing plant, and let alone your grandfather's manufacturing plant. And what was amazing to me was the kids brought their parents, and the parents were like, "Tell me how I can prepare my, you know, my child to be." And these are people of all income levels. This was not, you know, just, you know, for the elites. And what you realize is there's an enormous demand by individuals to understand how am I get myself ready. So absolutely, I think there's two forces coming at this. One is families and young people and technology coming together on the one hand to empower the consumer, And the second is businesses they are really struggling and have been to say, I need a workforce. I've got jobs. The jobs are changing. I'm willing to participate more in the educational process, but I need educational providers that are meeting my needs, and I need to be matched up with the individuals who want to become lifelong learners. So I see those two forces as having a lot of potential impact. So I'm hoping for a social movement. So those of you who want to start one, I'm all in.
All right, well, this has been terrific. I think there are several business ideas in what you just said, and some of the people in this audience, I hope, pursue them. But thank you very much, Penny. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Richard.